I sat across from Marcus at that polished oak table in conference room B, watching him sign our divorce papers with an exaggerated flourish. The October morning light streamed through the courthouse windows as he slid the documents across to me, that familiar smirk plastered across his face. Finally free from dead weight, he muttered to his attorney, Bradley Morrison, loud enough for me to hear every calculated word. Bradley chuckled like they were sharing some private joke at my expense. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the papers, but I kept my expression steady. Marcus checked his expensive Rolex, probably already planning his celebration dinner with Amanda, his 24-year-old secretary. Little did he know what was coming next. 6 months earlier, my world had started crumbling in the most ordinary way possible. I remember pulling Marcus's dress shirts from the laundry basket, preparing to iron them for his business trip to Chicago. That's when I saw it, a coral pink lipstick stain on his white collar. Not my shade. I don't even wear coral. My stomach dropped as I held that shirt up to the bathroom light. 12 years of marriage, and I was staring at evidence that my husband was cheating on me. But Marcus had always been so good at making me question my own perceptions. "You're imagining things, Dena," he said when I confronted him that evening. He barely looked up from his laptop, typing away like my concerns were just background noise. "Maybe you should see someone, a therapist. You've been paranoid lately." Paranoid. That word stung because part of me wondered if he was right. Had I been looking for problems that didn't exist? But then I started paying attention to other things. Credit card charges at romantic restaurants I'd never been to, conference calls that stretched past midnight, the way he'd step outside to take certain phone calls. The breaking point came when I found Amanda Clearwater's Facebook profile. Picture after picture of Marcus at his supposed business conferences, but he wasn't alone. There she was, young and blonde, and everything I used to be 15 years ago. The photos showed them at dinners, hotel bars, even a weekend trip to Napa Valley that Marcus had told me was a sales retreat. When I confronted him with the evidence, something in his face changed. The mask slipped, and for the first time, I saw who Marcus really was underneath all those years of marriage. "Our marriage was over years ago, Dena," he said coldly, closing his laptop and finally looking at me directly. "I just didn't want to hurt you by saying it out loud. But since you're so determined to play detective, let's be honest. You've let yourself go. You work part-time at a library making $12 an hour. You contribute nothing meaningful to this household." His words hit like physical blows. I stood there in our kitchen, surrounded by the home I'd lovingly maintained for over a decade, and listened to my husband itemize all the ways I'd disappointed him. "I want a divorce." He continued, his tone as casual as if he were ordering coffee. "I've already spoken to Bradley Morrison. He's the best family law attorney in the city. You can find yourself some public defender or whatever it is people like you use." People like me, as if I was beneath him somehow. Over the following weeks, Marcus began systematically moving our joint assets into accounts under his sole name. He controlled our finances, had always handled the banking and investments, while I focused on maintaining our home and working my part-time position at the Riverside Public Library. To anyone looking from the outside, I appeared completely financially dependent on him. Marcus would come home from work and flaunt his relationship with Amanda, taking calls from her while I was in the room making dinner reservations loud enough for me to hear. He seemed to take pleasure in my apparent helplessness. "You'll be lucky to get $500 a month in alimony," he told me one evening, cutting into his steak like he was discussing the weather. "Bradley says someone with your limited work history and no real skills can't expect much. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to coast through life." But here's what Marcus didn't know. While he thought I was just a broken, naive woman accepting my fate, I had been doing something else entirely. Every conversation we'd had about the divorce, every cruel comment, every admission about his affair, and his plans to leave me destitute, I'd been recording it all with a hidden app on my phone. 18 hours of audio evidence. Marcus admitting to the affair, discussing how he'd manipulated our finances, even bragging to Bradley about how easy it would be to paint me as an irresponsible wife who deserved nothing. My quiet demeanor and tear-filled eyes had masked a strategic mind that was methodically building the strongest legal case possible. While Marcus saw a victim, I was becoming something far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The hardest part wasn't Marcus's betrayal itself. It was pretending everything was normal while secretly preparing for war. For 3 months, I'd been meeting Patricia Reynolds at a small coffee shop called Morning Brew, 20 minutes across town, where no one would recognize me. Patricia was everything Marcus's attorney wasn't: thorough, patient, and genuinely interested in protecting her clients rather than just winning at any cost. Most women in your situation make the mistake of reacting emotionally, Patricia explained during our second meeting, sliding a legal pad across the small table. They confront, they fight, they threaten. That gives their husbands time to hide assets and prepare defenses. You're doing this right, Dena. Document everything, say nothing, let him believe he's in control. So that's exactly what I did. While Marcus flaunted his affair and made plans with Bradley Morrison, I was secretly documenting every aspect of our household expenses, his income patterns, and his increasingly erratic spending behavior. I photographed credit card statements before he could shred them, recorded his phone conversations about hiding money, and maintained detailed logs of his work schedule versus his claimed whereabouts. The most devastating discovery came when I found his secret savings account. Marcus had been systematically skimming money from our joint household budget for over 3 years, telling me we needed to tighten our belts while secretly accumulating $47,000 in an account I'd never known existed. 3 years. While I clipped coupons and bought generic groceries to stay within the budget he'd set for me, Marcus was building a nest egg for his new life with Amanda. The betrayal went deeper than just the affair. This was calculated long-term financial abuse. He'd been planning his exit strategy for years, slowly suffocating my access to money while presenting himself as the responsible spouse, managing our finances. "This is actually good news," Patricia said when I showed her the bank statements I'd photographed. "Financial fraud in a marriage is taken very seriously by family court judges. He's not just cheating on you, Dena. He's been stealing from you." But documenting Marcus's betrayal came with an emotional cost I hadn't anticipated. For legal strategic reasons, I couldn't tell anyone about the divorce proceedings. Not my sister Jenny, not my few close friends, not even my mother. I had to maintain the facade of a normal marriage while gathering evidence, which meant enduring Marcus's increasing cruelty without any support system. He seemed to enjoy testing how much abuse I would tolerate. At dinner parties, he'd make jokes about my appearance in front of our friends. "Dena's really let herself go since we got married," he'd say, with a laugh that made my cheeks burn with humiliation. "I keep telling her she should hit the gym, but you know how it is with some women." When we were alone, the comments were even more vicious. He'd compare me to Amanda, constantly telling me how young and ambitious she was, how she understood his career goals in ways I never could. "Amanda actually cares about my success," he said one night, applying cologne before heading out to what he claimed was a client dinner. "She asks intelligent questions about my work. When's the last time you showed any interest in my career? Dena, when's the last time you showed interest in anything besides those ridiculous books at the library?" I absorbed every insult while secretly recording them, building my case one cruel comment at a time. But late at night, alone in our guest bedroom, where I'd moved to avoid his coldness, I struggled with the emotional weight of what I was doing. Part of me grieved for the man I'd fallen in love with, the person I'd thought Marcus was before his mask slipped. Another part of me was learning to nurture a steel-cold anger that would serve me well in the battles ahead. The breakthrough moment came during Marcus's business trip to Denver. He'd been gone for 3 days, supposedly meeting with pharmaceutical distributors for Richardson Labs, the company where he worked as a regional sales director. I used his absence to search his home office more thoroughly than ever before. Hidden behind a row of business books, I found a small key I'd never seen before. It took me 2 hours of searching online to identify it as a safety deposit box key from First National Bank downtown. The next morning, I told the library I was sick and drove to the bank. Using our marriage certificate and identification, I gained access to the box Marcus had opened 6 months earlier. What I found inside made my hands shake as I photographed each document with the timestamp app Patricia had recommended. A lease agreement for a luxury apartment downtown, in both Marcus's and Amanda's names, effective immediately after our divorce was finalized. Jewelry purchase receipts totaling over $15,000, all for items I'd never seen. And most damaging of all, legal documents showing Marcus had been setting up an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, systematically preparing to move money beyond the reach of American courts. Marcus wasn't just planning to divorce me. He'd been preparing for years to vanish with our assets, leaving me with nothing. The apartment lease showed he'd paid 6 months' rent in advance. The jewelry receipts were dated throughout our marriage, meaning he'd been buying expensive gifts for Amanda using money that legally belonged to both of us. But the offshore account paperwork was the smoking gun Patricia needed. Marcus was planning to commit international financial fraud to avoid paying fair support after our divorce. This changes everything, Patricia said when I showed her the photographs later that day. He's not just hiding assets domestically. He's planning to commit federal crimes to avoid his legal obligations to you. This kind of premeditated financial fraud carries serious penalties, and it proves malicious intent that will influence how the judge views every other aspect of your case. As I drove home that evening, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. I was no longer the broken wife grieving her failed marriage. I had become something Marcus never expected and would never understand: a strategist with the patience and intelligence to outmaneuver him at his own game. The woman who had once cried herself to sleep over lipstick stains was gone. In her place was someone far more dangerous, someone who understood that the best revenge isn't emotional, it's methodical. The courthouse felt different when you entered it as a warrior instead of a victim. I chose my outfit carefully that first morning of proceedings. A simple navy blue dress that projected confidence without ostentation, minimal makeup, and the pearl earrings my grandmother had given me for my college graduation. I wanted to look like exactly what Marcus expected: the quiet, financially dependent wife who would accept whatever scraps his legal team threw my way. Marcus, on the other hand, had dressed for victory. His charcoal gray suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he wore his gold Rolex like a weapon. He strutted into that courtroom with Bradley Morrison, like he owned the place, nodding confidently at Amanda, who sat in the gallery wearing a red dress that screamed money and ambition. Judge Hamilton called the session to order, and I watched Marcus's performance with a mixture of disgust and fascination. He was so convinced of his own superiority that he actually seemed to be enjoying himself. Bradley Morrison opened with exactly the strategy Patricia had predicted: paint Dena as the financially irresponsible housewife who had contributed nothing meaningful to the marriage and deserved minimal support. "Your Honor," Bradley began, his voice carrying the kind of confidence that comes from years of winning cases through intimidation rather than facts, "my client has been the sole financial provider in this marriage for over 12 years. Mrs. Richardson works part-time at a public library, earning approximately $600 per month, while Mr. Richardson's annual salary exceeds $90,000. He has been solely responsible for the mortgage, utilities, insurance, and all major household expenses." Everything Bradley said was technically true, but it was truth stripped of context, designed to make me appear parasitic, rather than simply following the traditional division of labor that Marcus himself had insisted upon when we married. Marcus took the witness stand with the same swagger he brought to sales presentations, ready to systematically dismantle our 12-year marriage in front of a room full of strangers. Dena never showed any interest in advancing her career. He testified, looking directly at Judge Hamilton instead of at me. "I encouraged her many times to pursue full-time employment or go back to school, but she preferred the comfort of part-time work. She's never taken initiative in financial planning, never contributed meaningfully to our household income, and has consistently made poor spending decisions." Poor spending decisions. This from a man who'd secretly spent $15,000 on jewelry for his mistress. "I've been essentially supporting a dependent adult for over a decade," Marcus continued, warming to his theme. "While I worked 10-hour days building my career, Dena spent her time reading novels and maintaining what she called hobbies. She's never demonstrated any real ambition or drive to contribute to our financial security." The cruelest moment came when Bradley asked Marcus to detail what he saw as my personal failings that had led to the marriage's breakdown. "Dena has become increasingly isolated and unmotivated over the years." Marcus set his tone, suggesting he was a long-suffering husband, finally able to speak his truth. "She's gained considerable weight, stopped taking care of her appearance, and shown no interest in personal growth. She spends her evenings reading romance novels instead of engaging with the real world. I believe she's been clinically depressed for years but refuses to seek help." I felt tears beginning to form as Marcus systematically destroyed not just our marriage, but my character. Every insecurity I'd ever shared with him in private moments was now being weaponized against me in public court. The weight gain he mentioned had happened after my second miscarriage, something he'd promised to never use against me. The isolation he described was largely due to his own controlling behavior that had gradually separated me from friends and family. But the worst moment came when Marcus turned to face me directly and delivered what he clearly thought was his knockout punch. "I'm requesting that Dena vacate our family home within 30 days of the divorce finalization," he said, his eyes cold and calculating. "She has no legal claim to a property she never helped finance. And frankly, I don't think she has the emotional stability to maintain it properly anyway." Amanda squeezed Marcus's hand when he returned to his seat, and I saw them exchange a look of anticipated triumph. In their minds, this was already over. The naive little librarian would accept whatever minimal settlement they offered and disappear quietly into whatever small apartment her tiny salary could afford. Even my own family looked shaken by Marcus's testimony. My sister Jenny sat in the gallery with tears in her eyes, probably wondering how she'd failed to see how bad things had become. My mother kept glancing between Marcus and me, like she couldn't reconcile this cruel stranger with the man she'd welcomed into our family 12 years ago. Judge Hamilton asked preliminary questions about asset division, and Marcus responded with the same confidence he'd shown throughout his testimony. According to him, our marital assets consisted primarily of our home, his retirement account, and modest saving. He conveniently omitted any mention of the offshore accounts, the secret savings, or the luxury apartment he'd leased for his post-divorce life. "Your Honor, I believe a settlement of $500 per month in temporary spousal support would be more than generous," Bradley Morrison concluded, "given my client's overwhelming financial contributions to this marriage and Mrs. Richardson's minimal work history. $500 in a city where studio apartments rented for $1,200 minimum." But then Patricia Reynolds stood to present our evidence, and suddenly the entire atmosphere in that courtroom shifted. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who held all the winning cards and was simply waiting for the right moment to play them. "Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the smugness that had filled the room during Marcus's testimony, "I'd like to request a postponement of 1 week before presenting Mrs. Richardson's financial disclosure and responding to opposing counsel's settlement proposal." Bradley Morrison shot to his feet, clearly caught off guard. "Objection, Your Honor. We've prepared extensively for today's proceedings. A delay serves no legitimate legal purpose." But Judge Hamilton was already nodding toward Patricia. "Motion granted. We'll reconvene next Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. for Mrs. Richardson's presentation." As we filed out of the courtroom, I could see confusion and annoyance on Marcus's face. This wasn't going according to his script. He'd expected me to crumble under his testimony, to accept whatever terms he offered, just to escape the humiliation of a prolonged court battle. Outside on the courthouse steps, Patricia pulled me aside with a smile that made my heart race with anticipation. "Dena, I just received some very interesting information from our private investigator," she said, lowering her voice as Marcus and Bradley passed within earshot. "Thomas Baker has been monitoring your husband's professional activities, and it seems Marcus has been embezzling from Richardson Labs. The company's audit discovered missing inventory worth approximately $200,000, and a federal investigation is beginning within the next 72 hours. I felt the world tilt around me as Patricia continued explaining her strategy. "We're going to let Marcus commit fully to his testimony about being the responsible financial partner in your marriage," she said, her eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a chess master, seeing checkmate several moves ahead. "Because when he's arrested for federal embezzlement charges, every word he just said in that courtroom will make him look like a criminal and a liar." Marcus had no idea that his own arrogance had just sealed his fate. While he was planning celebration dinners with Amanda, federal investigators were building a case that would destroy not just his freedom, but his credibility as the wronged husband seeking a reasonable divorce. The quiet little librarian he'd underestimated was about to become his worst nightmare. "I want to tell you about a phone call that changed my life, though I didn't realize it at the time. It happened 8 years ago, on a rainy Thursday evening in March. I was washing dishes when my phone rang, and the caller ID showed my Aunt Margaret's lawyer. Aunt Margaret had died suddenly of a heart attack at 62, and while I grieved her loss deeply, I never expected to inherit anything significant. She'd been the family eccentric, the woman who'd never married, and had spent her life traveling and making what my mother called questionable investment decisions. "I'm Ms. Richardson," the lawyer said formally. Your aunt's will designates you as the beneficiary of her investment portfolio, valued at approximately $25,000. $25,000. It was more money than I'd ever had access to in my entire life. Marcus made good money at Richardson Labs, but he controlled every penny of it. This inheritance was mine alone legally and completely. I never told Marcus about that money. Looking back, I think some instinct warned me to keep it secret. Maybe it was the way he'd started controlling our household budget more strictly that year, or the way he'd begun dismissing my opinions about money as uninformed. Whatever the reason, I opened a separate savings account in my name only and deposited that check without mentioning it to my husband. For weeks, I just let the money sit there, earning minimal interest, while I figured out what to do with it. Then I remembered my college roommate, Sarah Chen, who'd always been brilliant with technology and had recently started a company called Digital Solutions Network with two partners from her MBA program. Sarah and I had stayed close after graduation, meeting for coffee every few months to catch up on our lives. During one of those conversations, she'd mentioned that her startup was seeking investors for their second round of funding. We're developing software that helps small businesses manage their customer relationships more efficiently, she'd explained, her eyes lighting up with the passion that had always made her magnetic. The market potential is enormous, but we need capital to scale properly. Something about Sarah's confidence and the thoroughness of her business plan appealed to me. Maybe it was my own frustration with feeling financially powerless in my marriage, but I decided to invest Aunt Margaret's entire inheritance in Digital Solutions Network. Marcus never asked where the money went. He assumed I'd spend it on clothes or books or some other frivolous purchase that proved his point about my poor financial judgment. If only he'd known that his allegedly irresponsible wife had just made the smartest investment decision of her life. Digital Solutions Network grew slowly at first, then explosively, as cloud-based software became essential for businesses of every size. Sarah proved to be not just a brilliant developer, but a savvy entrepreneur who understood market timing and customer needs. Within 3 years, the company had gone from 3 people in a shared office to a major player in business software with clients across North America. My initial $25,000 investment began generating returns that astounded me. First, modest dividend payments that I reinvested immediately, then larger distributions as the company expanded into new markets. By year 5, my quarterly checks were substantial enough that I had to get creative about hiding them from Marcus. That's when I made my second secret investment using the profits from Digital Solutions Network to buy distressed properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods around the city. I researched every purchase, meticulously studying development patterns, school district improvements, and infrastructure investments that would drive property values higher over time. My first property was a duplex in the Highland District that needed significant renovation. I bought it for $42,000, spent another $15,000 on improvements, and rented both units for enough monthly income to cover the mortgage and maintenance costs while building equity. The renovation work introduced me to Frank Rodriguez, a contractor whose crew specialized in turning rundown properties into attractive rentals. Frank became my partner in a systematic approach to real estate investment that grew more sophisticated with each property acquisition. "You've got a good eye for potential," Frank told me after we'd successfully renovated our third building together. "Most people see problems, but you see possibilities. That's a rare talent in this business." Within 6 years, I owned 4 rental properties across different neighborhoods, each one carefully selected for its potential to appreciate in value while generating positive monthly cash flow. My tenants were carefully screened working families who appreciated well-maintained affordable housing, and my properties maintained waiting lists because I kept them in excellent condition. But the most elegant part of my secret business life was how I camouflaged it. To Marcus, I was still working part-time at the Riverside Public Library, earning my modest paycheck and contributing my small amount to our household expenses. What he didn't know was that my library job had become the perfect cover for managing my real estate empire. When I told him I was working late at the library, I was actually meeting with contractors, interviewing potential tenants, or handling maintenance issues at my properties. When I said I was attending library conferences on weekends, I was often taking real estate investment courses or networking with other property owners. The financial education I pursued in secret was as thorough as any MBA program. I studied tax law, mortgage financing, property management, and market analysis. I earned my real estate license and built a network of female entrepreneurs who supported each other's business ventures without the knowledge or interference of controlling husbands. Gloria Martinez became my property manager, handling day to day tenant issues, while I focused on acquisition and strategic planning. Through Gloria, I met other women who'd built successful businesses while maintaining traditional appearances in their marriages. We called ourselves the Thursday Coffee Club, though we never actually met on Thursdays and rarely discussed coffee. We were wives and mothers who discovered the power of financial independence, supporting each other through the complex emotions that came with hiding success from the men who claimed to love us. The hardest part isn't building the business, y'all, confided Rachel, who'd built a successful online retail company. While her husband believed she spent her days volunteering at their children's school, it's the loneliness of not being able to share your victories with the person who's supposed to be your partner. That loneliness was real and painful. Every successful property purchase, every dividend check, every milestone in my growing wealth felt hollow because I couldn't share it with Marcus. But I learned through bitter experience that Marcus's love was conditional on his sense of superiority. He needed to be the provider, the financial decision maker, the one with power in our relationship. Telling him about my success would have threatened his identity in ways that would have destroyed our marriage even sooner. So I carried my achievements in secret, nurturing pride and confidence that I couldn't express at home. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Marcus criticized my lack of ambition and poor financial sense, I was building wealth that far exceeded his annual salary while he controlled every penny of our household budget. I was generating multiple streams of passive income that gave me true financial security. Then, last Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week before our final divorce hearing, Sarah called with news that stopped my heart. Dena, I need to tell you something incredible. Sarah's voice was shaking with excitement. We just received a buyout offer from Tech Global Solutions. They want to acquire Digital Solutions Network for $52 million. $52 million. I had to sit down in the library parking lot as Sarah explained the deal terms. Based on your ownership percentage, your shares would be worth approximately $8.4 million, Sarah continued. The sale is scheduled to finalize exactly 1 day after your divorce hearing concludes. But Dana, there's something else you need to know about this deal. My hands trembled as Sarah delivered information that seemed impossible to believe. Tech Global Solutions is a subsidiary of Richardson Labs' parent company, she said slowly, letting the implications sink in. Through a series of corporate acquisitions over the past 2 years, Marcus's employer is now connected to our company. Technically, his salary and benefits, even Amanda's paycheck as his secretary, all flow through revenue streams that your investment helped create. Marcus had been unknowingly working for a company that I partially owned. His affair partner's salary came from profits generated by my business acumen. The man who'd spent 8 years telling me I had no head for business had been financially dependent on my investment success without ever realizing it. As I sat in that parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, I felt something shift inside me that went beyond vindication or revenge. I felt the profound satisfaction of a woman who'd spent years being told she was worthless, only to discover that her worth extended far beyond anything her critics could imagine. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and reveal to Marcus exactly what the quiet little librarian had accomplished while he wasn't paying attention. The woman he'd underestimated, belittled, and planned to financially destroy was about to show him what real power looked like. Some secrets run deeper than others, and some run through generations like underground rivers that eventually surface when you least expect them. 3 days before my final court hearing, I learned that my family had been keeping the biggest secret of all. My grandmother Rose and I had what you might charitably call a complicated relationship. She was my father's mother, a woman who'd built a real estate empire in the 1970s and 80s when such things were nearly impossible for women to achieve. Rose was brilliant, ruthless, and completely unimpressed by the men her granddaughters chose to marry. From the moment Marcus and I announced our engagement, Rose made her disapproval clear in the subtle, cutting way that only she could master. That young man sees dollar signs when he looks at you, dear, she told me at our wedding reception, sipping champagne and watching Marcus work the room like a politician. Mark my words, he'll show his true colors when he thinks there's money to be gained or lost. At the time, I was too in love and too defensive to listen to her warnings. Rose represented everything I thought I wanted to escape the family obsession with money, the calculating approach to relationships, the way business always seemed to matter more than emotion. Marcus was different, I told myself. He loved me for who I was, not for what I might inherit. So when Rose began making increasingly pointed comments about Marcus's character over the years, I pulled away from her rather than questioning his. Our family gatherings became tense affairs, where Rose would make sharp observations about Marcus's behavior while I defended him out of loyalty and stubbornness. A real man builds his wife up rather than tearing her down, Rose said during Christmas dinner 3 years ago after Marcus had made a particularly cutting joke about my appearance in front of the entire family. And a real man doesn't need to diminish his wife to feel important himself. That was our last conversation. I was so angry at her for publicly challenging my marriage that I stopped returning her phone calls and declined her invitations. When she died 6 months ago, I attended the funeral, but felt like a stranger among my own relatives, carrying guilt about our unresolved relationship alongside my grief. The family had been told that Rose's estate was complex and would take months to settle due to various business holdings and legal complications. None of us expected to inherit anything significant, since Rose had always been secretive about her finances and had outlived most of her contemporaries. That's why Gerald Pemberton's phone call on Friday afternoon came as such a shock. "Miss Richardson, I'm calling regarding your grandmother's final will and testament," Gerald said, in the formal tone that estate attorneys must practice in law school. "I'm afraid the probate process has taken longer than anticipated due to the scope of Mrs. Dalton's holdings, but we're now ready to proceed with distribution." Mrs. Dalton. Rose had kept her maiden name even after marriage, back when such choices required real courage. I should have paid more attention to what that choice meant about her character. "Your grandmother has designated you as the primary beneficiary of her estate," Gerald continued, and I had to ask him to repeat himself because the words didn't make sense. Primary beneficiary, not partial beneficiary, not shared beneficiary. Primary. "I don't understand," when I said, sinking into the chair at my kitchen table. "What about my cousins Michael and Tracy? What about my father's share?" Mrs. Dalton was very specific about her wishes, Gerald explained patiently. "She left modest sums to other family members, but the bulk of her estate goes to you. This includes several downtown office buildings, multiple residential complexes across 3 states, undeveloped land holdings, and liquid assets totaling approximately $4.7 million. $4.7 million, in addition to real estate holdings. The total value of your inheritance is approximately $14.2 million. Gerald said, his voice suggesting he was accustomed to delivering such news, but understood its impact on recipients. Mrs. Dalton left detailed instructions that the estate should not be distributed until after your current legal proceedings conclude. She was quite specific about the timing. I hung up the phone in a daze, trying to process what Gerald had just told me. Rose had been worth $14 million, and she'd left almost all of it to me while deliberately timing the distribution to coincide with my divorce proceedings. The next morning, Gerald's office called again. Rose had left something else, a letter to be delivered after the initial estate conversation. I drove downtown in a fog of disbelief and grief, wondering how I'd so completely misjudged both my grandmother's wealth and her feelings toward me. Gerald's office occupied the top floor of one of the downtown buildings that I was learning I now owned. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," Gerald said, handing me a sealed envelope addressed in Rose's distinctive handwriting. "She spent considerable time planning this inheritance, including provisions that her other family members contest the will, which several already have attempted." Rose's letter was 7 pages long, written in her precise script, with the same attention to detail she'd brought to every aspect of her business life. "My dear Dena," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm dead, and you're probably wondering why a bitter old woman who seemed to disapprove of everything you did has left you a fortune. The truth is, I've been watching you very carefully for years, and I've seen something in you that I don't think you've seen in yourself. The letter went on to explain that Rose had hired a private investigator to monitor Marcus's behavior for the past 2 years. She'd known about his affair, his financial manipulation, and his embezzlement activities long before I'd discovered any of it myself. That husband of yours is exactly what I thought he was from the beginning, Rose wrote. A man who thinks he can succeed by diminishing the woman beside him rather than building something meaningful on his own merit. I've been waiting for you to see through his facade, and I'm proud of how you've handled his betrayal. But the most shocking revelation came in the letter's final pages. The timing of this inheritance is deliberate, Rose explained. I've had my attorney delay the probate process until your divorce proceedings began, because I wanted you to face Marcus's betrayal with nothing but your own strength first. You needed to discover your own power before inheriting mine. The woman who can secretly build a business empire while managing a crumbling marriage is someone who deserves the tools to build something even greater. Rose had known about my real estate investments, my stock ownership in Digital Solutions Network, everything I'd thought I was hiding from the world. Through her private investigator and her own business networks, she'd been monitoring my financial activities and approving of my strategic approach to independence. You have the intelligence and patience that wealth requires to be a force for good rather than simply privilege, Rose continued. Use this inheritance to continue the work you've already begun, but remember that money is just a tool. The real power lies in the character you've developed through adversity. The letter's final paragraph brought tears that I couldn't control. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you any of this while I was alive. I needed you to believe you were facing Marcus's betrayal alone so you could discover that you're strong enough to handle anything. But you were never truly alone. I've been watching, planning, and preparing to give you every advantage for the battles ahead. Consider this your armor, dear. Now go show the world what a Rose Dalton granddaughter can accomplish. Gerald provided additional documents that showed the scope of what Rose had built office complexes in 3 major cities, residential developments, commercial real estate, and investment portfolios that had been carefully managed for maximum growth over 4 decades. She'd started with a $5,000 loan and an unshakable belief that real estate ownership was the key to true independence. By the time she died, Rose Dalton had become one of the wealthiest women in the state, though she'd lived modestly and kept her success private. Your grandmother specified that these documents should be presented as evidence in your divorce proceedings, Gerald explained, sliding a thick folder across his mahogany desk. She wanted to ensure that your husband's attorney would have no opportunity to claim any portion of your inherited assets. As I drove home that evening, I realized that Rose had orchestrated something far more complex than a simple inheritance. She'd timed everything to ensure that I would face my darkest moment with nothing but my own resources, discover my own strength and capability, and then receive the tools to build something extraordinary from that foundation. Tomorrow, Marcus would learn that the woman he'd planned to leave destitute had access to wealth that exceeded his wildest dreams. But more importantly, he'd discover that the quiet little librarian he'd underestimated had inherited not just money, but the strategic wisdom and business acumen of one of the most successful women in the state. Rose's final gift wasn't just financial, it was the knowledge that I came from a line of women who refused to be diminished by men who mistook cruelty for strength. The courtroom felt different when you walked into it carrying $23.4 million worth of ammunition. I wore the same navy blue dress I'd chosen for the first hearing, but this time it felt like armor instead of camouflage. Patricia Reynolds sat beside me with 3 thick folders of evidence and a smile that could have powered the courthouse lighting. Across the aisle, Marcus and Bradley Morrison radiated the same confidence they'd shown a week earlier, clearly expecting this to be a formality before their victory. Marcus had dressed even more expensively today, if such a thing were possible. His navy suit was clearly custom-tailored, and he'd gotten his hair cut at that salon downtown that charges $200 for what most men get for $20. Amanda sat in the gallery wearing a black dress that screamed celebration outfit, her engagement ring catching the overhead lights every time she moved her hands. Yes, engagement ring. Marcus had proposed to her 3 days after our first hearing, apparently so confident in his legal position that he felt comfortable making his next relationship public. The local newspaper Society page had even run a small announcement about the pharmaceutical executive and his young fiancée. Judge Hamilton called the session to order. and I watched Marcus straighten his shoulders like an actor preparing for the performance of his life. He had no idea that he was about to become the unwilling star of a different kind of show entirely. We're here today for Mrs. Richardson's financial disclosure and response to the settlement proposal presented last week, Judge Hamilton announced. Counselor Reynolds, you may proceed. Patricia stood with the deliberate grace of someone who'd been anticipating this moment for months. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call Mrs. Dena Richardson to the stand for her financial testimony. The walk from my chair to the witness stand felt like the longest journey of my life, but also the most satisfying. I could feel Marcus's eyes on me, probably still wondering why I'd requested this delay when his settlement offer was the best a woman in my position could expect to receive. Patricia began with basic questions designed to establish my work history and apparent financial position. I answered each one honestly: my part-time library salary, the modest checking account Marcus knew about, the small contribution I made to our household expenses. To anyone listening, I sounded exactly like the financially dependent wife Marcus had described in his testimony. Mrs. Richardson, have you made any investments or business ventures during your marriage? Patricia asked, and I saw Marcus lean forward slightly. He'd probably coached Bradley to object if I tried to claim any significant assets, but curiosity kept him quiet. Yes, I replied simply. I have made several investments over the years. Can you describe these investments for the court? I took a deep breath and began with my Digital Solutions Network stock purchase, 8 years earlier. I explained about my Aunt Margaret's inheritance, my decision to invest in Sarah's startup, and the growth of that investment over time. Marcus's face showed mild interest, but no concern. Even a successful stock investment couldn't amount to enough money to change his position significantly. But then I moved on to my real estate holdings. I currently own 4 rental properties in various neighborhoods around the city. I testified, maintaining the same calm tone I'd used to describe library cataloging procedures. These properties generate monthly rental income while appreciating in value over time. Now Marcus was sitting up straighter. 4 properties represented real money enough to complicate his plans, if not derail them entirely. I saw him whisper something urgent to Bradley Morrison, who began shuffling through papers with increasing agitation. Mrs. Richardson, did you recently receive any additional assets? Patricia asked, moving toward the moment we'd both been anticipating. Yes. Last Friday, I learned that my grandmother, Rose Dalton, had left me her estate, including several commercial properties, residential complexes, undeveloped land, and liquid investments. The courtroom grew quiet as Patricia presented the estate documents Gerald Pemberton had prepared. Judge Hamilton reviewed each page carefully, while Marcus's face began showing the first signs of genuine alarm. Your Honor, Patricia continued, I'd like to request that the court's financial advisor calculate Mrs. Richardson's total net worth based on current property valuations and investment portfolio assessments. Judge Hamilton nodded toward the court's financial expert, a woman named Elizabeth Chen, who'd been quietly reviewing documents throughout the proceedings. Elizabeth approached a calculator and laptop computer with the efficiency of someone who'd performed this exercise hundreds of times. The next 10 minutes felt like hours. Elizabeth worked through property appraisals, stock valuations, and liquid asset totals while the courtroom maintained an almost supernatural silence. Marcus stared at the calculations with growing horror, clearly realizing that his carefully constructed narrative was about to collapse in spectacular fashion. Amanda's face had gone pale, and she kept glancing between Marcus and the exit, like she was calculating whether she could slip out before the numbers were finalized. Bradley Morrison was frantically whispering with his client, but Marcus seemed too stunned to respond coherently. Finally, Elizabeth straightened up and handed her calculations to Judge Hamilton. Your Honor, the judge announced in the formal tone reserved for significant legal moments, Mrs. Dena Richardson's verified net worth is $23.4 million. The courtroom exploded. Marcus's face drained of all color, and his hands gripped the table so tightly that his knuckles went white. He looked like he'd been physically struck, his mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. Wait, he finally stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. She is worth what? Amanda's engagement ring clinked against the gallery bench as her hands began shaking uncontrollably. She was staring at Marcus like she'd never seen him before, probably realizing that she'd just agreed to marry a man who was about to lose everything. while his ex-wife sailed away with more money than either of them could have imagined. Bradley Morrison was shuffling papers frantically, clearly trying to find some legal precedent that could salvage his client's position, but there was no precedent for this level of miscalculation. Marcus had built his entire legal strategy on the assumption that I was financially powerless, and that assumption had just been revealed as catastrophically wrong. But Patricia wasn't finished. She stood again in the courtroom, gradually quieted, as Judge Hamilton called for order. Your Honor, I have additional evidence to present regarding Mr. Richardson's character and credibility as a witness in these proceedings. She opened the second folder and began presenting the audio recordings I'd made of Marcus's confessions about his affair, his financial manipulation, and his plans to hide assets from the court. His own voice filled the courtroom, arrogant and cruel, describing his wife as dead weight and bragging about his plans to leave me with nothing. Then came the photographs from his safety deposit box, the secret apartment lease, the jewelry receipts, the offshore account documents that proved he'd been planning financial fraud on an international scale. Finally, Patricia presented the federal investigation documents that Thomas Baker had uncovered. Marcus wasn't just a cheating husband, he was a federal criminal, facing embezzlement charges that would destroy his career, his freedom, and any credibility he might have maintained in family court. As Patricia methodically destroyed what remained of Marcus's legal position, I felt something profound shift inside me. This wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about reclaiming my narrative from a man who'd spent years convincing me that I was worthless. Judge Hamilton reviewed the evidence with the grim expression of someone who'd seen many ugly divorces, but rarely one with this level of premeditated deception. Mr. Richardson, the judge said finally, you have presented testimony to this court that is not only false, but appears to constitute perjury in service of financial fraud. I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Marcus tried to speak, but only managed a strangled sound that might have been an attempt at an explanation. That's when the courtroom doors opened, and two federal agents entered with the kind of purposeful stride that means someone's day is about to get much worse. Marcus Richardson, Agent Johnson asked, approaching our table with handcuffs already visible. Yes, Marcus whispered, all of his earlier arrogance evaporating like steam. You're under arrest for embezzlement wire fraud and conspiracy to commit international money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. As Agent Johnson read Marcus his rights, I stood up slowly and walked over to where he sat in stunned silence. Amanda had already fled the courtroom, leaving behind only her purse and the engagement ring she'd apparently dropped in her hurry to escape. Marcus looked up at me with the desperate eyes of a man whose entire world had just collapsed around him. For just a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Consider this your severance, Marcus, I said quietly, my voice carrying the confidence of a woman who'd finally learned her own worth. Then I turned and walked away from the wreckage of our marriage, ready to build something beautiful from the ashes of his betrayal. 6 months have passed since that day in the courtroom, and I'm sitting in my new office overlooking the downtown skyline, reflecting on how dramatically life can change when you finally stop letting other people define your worth. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison after pleading guilty to embezzlement charges. The prosecutor said his cooperation in identifying other financial irregularities at Richardson Labs helped reduce what could have been a much longer sentence. Amanda received 6 months of community service after agreeing to testify about Marcus's attempts to involve her in money laundering schemes. Turns out their relationship had been even more calculated than I'd realized. Bradley Morrison faced a state bar ethics review for failing to properly investigate his client's financial claims before presenting them in court. He's still practicing law, but his reputation never recovered from the spectacular failure of Marcus's case. Judge Hamilton's final ruling granted me full protection of all assets and awarded substantial attorney fees that Marcus would be responsible for paying upon his release. More importantly, the judge included language in the final decree that recognized the financial abuse I'd endured and commended the strategic patience I'd shown in documenting it. But perhaps the most meaningful resolution involved my family relationships. My sister Jenny drove over the morning after the hearing with tears in her eyes and apologies for doubting my strength. I kept thinking I should have done something to help you, she said over coffee in my kitchen. I could see Marcus was getting crueler, but I assumed you were handling it and didn't want interference. I had no idea you were building this incredible plan the whole time. Jenny's words helped heal wounds I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. For years, I'd felt isolated by my secret preparations for independence, wondering if my family saw me as weak for staying with Marcus as long as I did. Learning that they'd simply been respecting what they thought were my boundaries, rather than judging my choices, lifted a weight I'd grown accustomed to carrying. Patricia Reynolds became more than just my attorney. She's become a mentor and friend who helped me understand that my strategic approach to escaping financial abuse could help other women in similar situations. Through her network of family law attorneys, I've begun consulting on cases where husbands use financial manipulation to control their wives. You have a gift for seeing patterns and planning several moves ahead, Patricia told me recently. Most women in your situation react emotionally and lose leverage. You turned emotional intelligence into a strategic advantage. That's a skill other women need to learn. The most satisfying transformation has been my relationship with my properties and investments. What started as secret survival planning has evolved into purposeful wealth building focused on creating opportunities for others. I've expanded my rental property business to include affordable housing units for single mothers transitioning out of difficult relationships. Through Frank Rodriguez's construction team, I'm renovating a downtown building that will house both affordable apartments and office space for women-owned businesses. The building includes a childcare center and financial literacy classroom, where women can learn the skills they need to achieve independence. Sarah's Digital Solutions Network sale finalized exactly as planned, and my $8.4 million payout has been invested in a diverse portfolio designed for long-term growth. But more importantly, Sarah and I have partnered on a new venture, a business incubator specifically focused on supporting women entrepreneurs who need both funding and mentorship to succeed. The Thursday Coffee Club has evolved into something more formal, a nonprofit foundation that provides microloans, business education, and legal support for women seeking financial independence. We meet monthly now, and our membership has grown from 5 women to over 30 each one, committed to helping others achieve the security that allows real freedom. But the most profound change has been internal. I wake up each morning in my new downtown penthouse apartment and feel something I'd forgotten was possible genuine excitement about my own life. For years, I'd measured my days by Marcus's moods and needs, adjusting my behavior to minimize his criticism rather than maximize my own potential. Now I measure my days by the impact I'm making, the relationships I'm building, and the goals I'm achieving independently. It's the difference between surviving and thriving, between reacting and creating. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter forwarded through Patricia's office. Marcus had written to me from federal prison, and I debated for days whether to read it. When I finally opened the envelope, I found something I'd never expected: a genuine apology. Dena, he wrote, I've had months to think about who I became during our marriage, and I'm horrified by the man I see in retrospect. You deserved a partner who celebrated your intelligence and supported your growth. Instead, you got someone who felt threatened by your potential and tried to diminish you to make myself feel important. I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that I finally understand how badly I failed you as a husband and as a human being. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing specific instances of his cruel behavior and acknowledging the financial abuse that I'd been too close to recognize fully while it was happening. Marcus had clearly been required to participate in counseling as part of his sentence, and it seemed to have given him genuine insight into the patterns that had destroyed our marriage. I hope you'll find happiness with someone who deserves you, the letter concluded, and I hope someday you'll be able to forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because you deserve the peace that comes with letting go of justified anger. I read that letter twice, then filed it away. Forgiveness isn't something you can rush, but understanding Marcus's transformation helped me release some of the lingering bitterness that was taking up space I'd rather use for more constructive purposes. Last month, I received an unexpected phone call from grandmother Rose's estate attorney. Gerald Pemberton had discovered an additional document among Rose's papers, a letter she'd written to be delivered exactly 1 year after my divorce was finalized. My dear granddaughter. Rose's letter began, "If you're reading this, then you've successfully navigated the legal challenge, and begun building your own life from the foundation of strength you discovered within yourself. I'm proud of you, though I suspect you no longer need my approval to feel confident in your choices. Rose's final letter contained something beyond pride or congratulations. It contained a challenge. Wealth without purpose becomes meaningless luxury, she wrote. I've given you financial tools, but your character will determine whether you use them to build something meaningful or simply accumulate comfort. The women in our family have always been builders, dear. The question is, what will you choose to build with the advantages you've inherited and earned? Reading Rose's words, I realized that my journey was just beginning. The courtroom victory over Marcus had been about justice and survival. What came next would be about legacy and purpose. This morning, I signed the papers to establish the Rose Dalton Foundation for Women's Financial Independence. The foundation will provide resources for women seeking to escape financially abusive relationships, offering everything from emergency funds and legal support to business loans and entrepreneurship education. Our first major project will be a partnership with the Riverside Public Library, where I once worked part-time for $12 an hour while secretly building an empire. We're funding a financial literacy program that will teach women the skills I had to learn alone: investment basics, real estate analysis, business planning, and legal rights in marriage and divorce. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm returning to the library where Marcus once mocked my lack of ambition. But this time, I'm coming back as a benefactor, an educator, rather than someone hiding from her own potential. As I finish writing this story, I want you to understand something important. My victory over Marcus wasn't just about money, though. Financial independence certainly provided the tools I needed to escape safely. The real victory was learning to trust my own intelligence, intuition, and strength after years of being told I possessed none of those qualities. If you're listening to this story because you recognize elements of your own relationship in Marcus's treatment of me, please know that you have more power than you realize. Financial abuse is designed to make you feel helpless, but knowledge and planning can restore your agency even in the most controlling situations. Start small, open a savings account in your own name, take a financial literacy class, build connections with other women who understand your situation. Document everything, and remember that patience is often more powerful than confrontation when you're dealing with someone who uses money as a weapon. But most importantly, remember that your worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion of you. Marcus spent years convincing me I was worthless because my success threatened his sense of superiority. The woman he called lazy and stupid was actually intelligent and strategic enough to outmaneuver him completely. You are stronger than you know, more capable than you've been allowed to believe, and worthy of relationships that celebrate rather than diminish your potential. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to accept treatment that doesn't honor your inherent dignity. The quiet little librarian Marcus underestimated became a millionaire philanthropist who's now helping other women discover their own power. Your transformation might look different, but it's just as possible and just as deserved. What began as a survival strategy became a blueprint for thriving. What started as escaping one man's control evolved into empowering countless women to control their own destinies. And what felt like the worst betrayal of my life became the catalyst for building something far more meaningful than the marriage I thought I was losing. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it can be sweeter than any revenge you could imagine. Now I have a question for all of you who've listened to my story. Have you ever discovered that what seemed like your greatest weakness was actually your hidden strength? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I believe there's power in women telling their truths to each other. If this story resonated with you, or might help someone else who's struggling with financial abuse or a controlling relationship, please like this video and share it with others who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories about women who refused to accept other people's limitations and built extraordinary lives from seemingly impossible circumstances. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your story is still being written. Make it a good one.